out of a different mic.
Okay.
I can hear us, yeah.
You got it?
Yeah, I'm getting it, but do it again. Why am I? Where else am I hearing that? Do that again.
You're hearing it in the booth?
Oh, you got
Yeah.
it in there.
Hold on.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I'm getting.
Let me pull you out.
I'm getting something. Yeah, that's better.
Good.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also kind of low here, so let me bring these up.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
You got the
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for your patience. We delayed our start for a few minutes because we thought between snow and the crowds that were waiting in line outside of the front door that we'd give people a little bit longer to find their way here. So good morning. I'm Martha Tedeschi, Deputy Director for Art and Research here at the Art Institute. It's my privilege this morning to get things started by extending a very warm welcome to all of you who've joined us on this surprisingly wintry April morning. I hope many of you were able to take advantage of this morning's early viewing to see the exhibition of Van Gogh's bedroom. I suspect some people are still finishing up their viewing and will join us shortly. But it is this exhibition, Van Gogh's Bedrooms, curated by Gloria Groom, which has provided the impetus and inspiration for today's event. We gather today for the public portion of a two-day symposium intended to focus a new lens on 19th century art. Yesterday, an intimate Scholars' Day allowed specialists, that is conservation scientists, conservators, technologists, and art historians, to share their ongoing research with each other, using case studies to focus on new methodologies and challenges in the technical analysis of works of art by Van Gogh and his contemporaries. Then, in last night's public keynote lecture, art historian and curator George Shackelford, who joins us from the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth, set the stage for today's broader consideration of how the study of 19th century art is raising new questions and yielding new discoveries as a result of innovative new directions in research, which include robust collaborations between art historians, conservators, and scientists, and is catalyzed by new technologies for analysis and imaging. Today's conversations will address how the practice of interpreting, exhibiting, and publishing scholarship on 19th century art has changed amid these 21st century advancements. Our moderators and panelists will explore how strategies of study have been shaped by innovations in conservation, digital technology, and interdisciplinary research. Case studies of works by Gustave Caillebotte, Edouard Manet, Vincent van Gogh, and Paul Gauguin will be discussed in depth. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge with gratitude the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for the major grant that funds the Chicago Objects Study Initiative, or COSI, a program of which today's symposium is an important component. I also want to thank the team of Art Institute staff who organized this event, brilliantly led by Jill Bogajski and Francesca Casadio. And finally, a very warm welcome and sincere thanks to our speakers. Your participation is very meaningful to us, and we look forward to hearing your ideas. And now it's my pleasure to welcome the moderator of this morning's panel, Martha Ward, who is a professor of 19th century art in the Department of Art History at the University of Chicago. Martha.
So I want to welcome you to the first panel of what promises to be an exciting day. The panel this morning is devoted to new directions in 19th century art, and our speakers have been asked to consider how interdisciplinaries are changing the study of 19th century art. To that end, we're going to have presentations offered by a quite distinguished group of experts from academia, museum curatorship, conservation, research, and publishing. Before introducing these forward-looking speakers, I'd like to offer a few backward-looking perspectives of my own to help frame this topic and its importance historically. In looking over the subjects for today's session and in thinking especially about the Van Gogh exhibition upstairs, I'm reminded of what happened in some museums in the 1930s. This was a time when rather extraordinary photographic close-ups were being produced for the scientific study of paintings, particularly for conservation purposes. A young, ambitious director of the National Gallery in London named Kenneth Clark saw that this technology designed for scientific study might help to usher in new ways of looking for the public. In 1938, Clark took 100 spectacular details of paintings in the National Gallery collection to fashion a book that went on to become an extraordinary success. I checked on Amazon this morning. You can still purchase it. I'm not sure which edition that is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 7 or 8. Providing striking views of faces, hands, backgrounds, and even nondescript patches without any captions beneath the photos to identify the painting from which they were taken, Clark invited audiences to go through the galleries with a new gaze, attending to minute aspects. This was partly an exercise in connoisseurship, whereby one would come to identify the hand of the artist by recognizing small telltale details of authorship. Surely some of the book's success was that it gave a general audience a chance to partake in this traditionally elite activity. But an even greater appeal of this book was that it satisfied the public's desire to relate to works of art in ways that felt quite new, quite contemporary. Directing audiences to attend specifically to the material configuration of a painting, Clark encouraged a general desire during this decade so taken with realist art to see how representational illusion is in the substance of the painted surface. Just as a certain notion of materiality was at play, so too was what we would now call intermediality. Clark's details of faces, in particular, invited close looking and provided an intimacy with works that he thought viewers accustomed to seeing cinematic close-ups would know to appreciate. Staging a provocative play of images across pages, Clark's book was highly inventive too in fostering a dialogue among different periods of art, and would help to inspire André Malraux after the war to create his famous book featuring photographic details, translated into English with the title The Museum Without Walls. With the benefit of hindsight, we can see that this early moment when images made for scientific purposes were brought to bear on notions of art historical practice, exhibition experience, and publication design, that in this early moment there were a number of factors at play. To be specific, technological advances coming from the lab that initially inspired Clark. But what he did with these was shaped by his keen understanding of his historical moment. This morning, as we think about what's happening to the study of 19th century art, I invite us to reflect on our desires for new ways of seeing, ones drawn from or resonating with advances in conservation science. I find myself wondering what is contributing to this groundswell of public interest in technical art history, its images and discoveries at this moment. Why are we talking about this now as the future? And why, in this context, are we talking specifically about 19th century art? There are many ways of addressing those questions, but let me speak very briefly here as an academic who's worked for many years in the field of 19th century French painting. The 1980s was a golden age for research on 19th century art, but it was also a battleground era, filled with spats over methodology at conferences like this one. It was a time when semiology, the social history of art, feminism were all the rage. In the United States, a divide developed then between an increasingly theoretically driven academy and a more object-based practice in museums. Colleagues in Europe, where more traditional modes of object-based training persisted, were overheard wondering aloud where the future curators for American museums would come from, given the theoretical turn taken by graduate education on this side of the Atlantic. Over the past 30 years, however, the Academy and the museum have gradually grown closer together, and now there are more opportunities for collaboration, especially around exhibitions. In recent years, the Mellon Foundation has funded initiatives to situate some student training in museums, including the program Martha just mentioned, the Chicago Object. COSI, as it's called, involves students from the University of Chicago and Northwestern in object-focused research at the Art Institute, including an introduction to technical art history. As a co-teacher in COSI this past winter, I found it interesting and challenging, rewarding, to bring the sorts of questions asked in graduate classrooms together with the sorts of questions curators and conservators ask of objects. In this context, the study of 19th century art offers special possibilities. For one thing, as we'll soon be hearing from Hollis Clayson, there's a quite diverse range of issues at play in the field just now. For another, so many late 19th century artists saw the value of their work to rest upon their own technical and material innovations that the field now seems made to order for technical art history. Ironically enough, this field, which in the 1980s was the most divided of all in the rift between the academy and the museum, is now poised as one of the most promising for training future scholars who we hope will go on to work in dialogue between the two. So one final note. In the 1930s, Kenneth Clark was able to creatively draw together art historical method, conservation images, innovative publication strategies, and new exhibition experiences single-handedly. That was partly because in all these domains there was a common terminology and approach based in connoisseurship. Now, however, these different domains, each of which will be represented on our panel today, have grown far more specialized with their own vocabularies, methodologies, and priorities. This morning offers us a wonderful and a rare opportunity to hear them talk to each other about what's new in the study of 19th century art. So our first speaker is Hollis Clayson, professor of art history and Bergen Evans professor in the humanities at Northwestern. She's published widely on Paris-based art practices and those of the transatlantic world. I could stand up here for quite a while enumerating those publications, but I'll just give you a few of her titles. Her books include Painted Love, Prostitution in French Art of the Impressionist Era, 1991. Paris in Despair, Art and Everyday Life Under Siege, 1870-71, published in 2002. And about to appear book, which will come out under the title Electric Paris, the City of Light in the Era of Thomas Edison. Please welcome Hollis Clayson.
Good morning. I couldn't possibly outdo, as is typical in my long-standing friendship and collegial relationship with Marty Ward, I could not possibly outdo her thoughtful overview of the various forces driving sort of the focus of technical art history on 19th century, especially French painting. So I'm feeling rather proud that my talk is comparatively shallow. Let me deliver an opening caveat. I'm not a technical art historian, though I do consider myself a partisan of long-standing, of close looking. But perhaps my not being a technical art historian explains how I have not thrust that perspective into the foreground in my remarks this morning. So, as preface, my short and modest talk has some, I must confess, immodest ambitions. As you'll see, my presentation is a cross between a methodology seminar syllabus and an art historical customization of something like a Yelp or a TripAdvisor guide to English language scholarship that exemplifies new directions in 21st century histories of 19th century art, mostly European. In what follows, I cheekily combine neutral delineation with passionate endorsement, but I intend to conceal the difference between those perspectives from you. So, some of the titles I will display are meant to serve quite straightforwardly as examples, tout court, while others are both that and more, fabulously innovative and exciting art history of the very best kind. That said, here we go. So what I'm going to present to you, it's not too flashy, this isn't. I spent some time thinking about what I took to be literally, this was sort of the remit I was handed, what really have been some of the areas, the clusters of interests and concerns and commitments that have in fact driven the history of 19th century art. And I have restricted myself to the 21st century, as you'll see. And I think that in some ways, the most capacious, the most powerful, in some ways, the most important is that which is glossed in my first slide, circulation and transnational, translocal, global perspectives. You know what the problem is, that if you put a title under one heading, it more or less places it in one Procrustean bed and doesn't allow it to exemplify other tendencies, but I think this is where these titles belong. The three pieces right up there at the top, which I'm putting under the subhead multidisciplinary foundations, it would be hard to imagine plunging into what now is frequently called global art history without having done one's work with Chakrabarty, Pinney, and Mbembe. And if you haven't read them yet, you have, oh no, I'm supposed to be neutral. I'm not supposed to tell you which ones I really think are, well, I'm going to already disobey my own rules and say, you must immediately read those three things that I have started my list with. Okay, now farther down the slide, I tried to pinpoint what I reckon to be very recently that are really driven by these concerns. You can tell from the titles of the works that we're talking about different axes, in some case, in Ting Chang's case, largely a Paris-Japan axis, in the case of Jennifer Roberts, largely northeast United States, London axis, with enormous emphasis falling upon the geographies and the exigencies of the passage across the Atlantic Ocean. But in any case, these are works that I think very much speak to this interest that I think really has maybe shaped our subfield more than just about any other. But this, of course, is also part of the same set of concerns. A dawning, and I think strengthening realization that it's pretty much impossible. One of the things, after all, that distinguishes 19th century Europe is that it was it not, it's hard to know what adjective to use. I hesitate to use the word great, but in any case, this, and many imaginative art historians have put themselves to work organizing their art historical inquiries within a realization of the nature of the exchanges, the networks, the power imbalances, the lust for artifacts, the exchange of artifacts that have to be understood to have been shaped by colonialism and empire. Here at my roster, from Tim Berenger, Susan Siegfried, Todd Porterfield, to John Zaro Bell, Deborah Silverman, Darcy Grigsby, to Elizabeth Childs. All of these very different kinds of inquiries are shaped by hewing to, and in some ways a recognition that, in some ways, the art history of 19th century Europe can't be written outside of a knowledge of colonialism and empire. And within those concerns, a couple titles I thought required being underscored, a particular focus on race as linked up with, as the key marker in this case, of difference and labor. One, perhaps a not well enough known exhibition review, and the other, an essay on a very well-known painting, Monet's Olympia, that has just rolled off the presses. Both of them very pointed investigations indeed. Another concern, it's funny to call science a concern, that makes it, that rather deflates its otherwise buoyant balloon of importance. I've corralled a list of fairly divergent pieces of scholarship under the heading of science. I think this is not just right. This is science that should also be understood to include, to some degree, technical art history, but I think you'll see technical art history reappear on my presentation under a slightly different heading momentarily. But have a look here, everything from Darwin to sort of the sort of psychocircuitry, the psycho-optical circuitry of human vision in the case of Paul Smith's, to the laboratory of experimentation in Matthew's, to Andrei Dombrowski's book Underway, which actually links Impressionism with the metrics and systems of timekeeping in the 19th century, another 19th century achievement after all. And right alongside, I guess, a cousin relationship, a sister relationship, here comes technology. I have somewhat vaingloriously, maybe, I don't know, I wasn't going to leave myself out. This is really the category in which my recent work belongs. But never mind me, let's give the spotlight to Carolyn Arscott. The exhibition that she has under construction that will open soon in London, Art and Telegraphy, will certainly be examination of the entanglements between the visual arts and another, one of the sort of headline news technological fashionings of the 19th century, namely telegraphic communication. Richard Tawes, another UK-based art historian, has also gotten his feet wet in the world of art linked to telegraphy. And I have gone whole hog into the sphere of artificial illumination technologies. Electric, yes, but when necessary, still messing around with gaslight and oil lamps and even candles when the artifacts ask for it. You can see I've got, well, there it is. And I've got another exhibition on this subject opening soon if you find yourself over the spring and summer in Greenwich, Connecticut. Something else that is another, it's not so much, you might say, it's not so much a methodological persuasion or a methodological thrust. It's instead a way to characterize certain kinds of art historical work that recognizes the always already intermedial, the linkedness of considered to be distinct and separable, and in so many different ways. I'm pretty proud of this particular list because it brings, well, what could we say? Intermediality makes strange bedfellows. How's that for probably the corniest sentence, at least so far this morning? Whether we have, Anne Leonard and Martha Ward's extraordinary compilation, which brings looking and listening, i.e. the optical and the oral together. Carolyn Arscott, who brings everything together from munition design to gymnastic performance, together with art, and Huguenet puts Manet's painting into the vortex, the visual economy of not just graphic arts, but the culture of reproduction. Sarah Kennel succeeded in putting Charles Marville's photography together with the actual infrastructure of Parisian street furniture. And Michael Marinin pulled something off that is uncommon indeed. He really made an analysis of 19th century painting as if it were cinematic, made it succeed. So here we have, obviously in a self-consciously anachronistic way, a bringing together of a still oil painting with the cinematic. Wait until, if you haven't read this yet, you'll never see Citizen Kane the same way again. I'm not doing very, very well at being neutral, but never mind. Now, something else that, again, and I guess perhaps this area of scholarship displays the most vividly at all the way in which academy-based scholarship is, of course, it better be driven by the urgent issues in the world outside. This term, the era of the Anthropocene, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. I don't see it being used very much in newspapers, but it's a term that has been widely embraced, especially in the humanities, to designate the moment in the history of planet Earth when it has become completely, vividly, unmistakably apparent that nature has been shaped, deformed, to some degree ruined by human practices. And that's called the era of the Anthropocene. And depending, a lot of people, of course, push it back way, way before the 19th century. But as you can say, it has shaped work on both landscape and a very busy, allied subfield work within animal studies. Now, here comes the category, maybe in some ways the most complicated. Here comes the category in which I think technical art history belongs. I think if we had more time, we could talk about art history between the museum and the academy being fully inside of what has to be called the material turn. And I think the point that Martha Ward made so eloquently prior to my arrival up here about the various sort of factors driving the focus upon 19th century art with technical means is part of a larger material turn in art history. I thought it wouldn't hurt for us to be reminded about the extraordinary essays that appeared in a special issue of the Art Bulletin not very long ago, and I'm just going to pull out what, for me, were the most instructive perspectives in there. Michael Holley talking about materiality as the meeting of matter and imagination, the place where opposites take refuge from their perpetual strife. Amelia Jones, who in some ways put her finger right in the middle of the key tension in the practice of art historical work, namely the tension between the transcendently secured value of the work of art, claiming, in other words, that it always transcends its materials, and at the same time, right, the work of art's obdurate materiality. Robin Kelsey, talking specifically about a corpus of modernist photography, reminded us about certain aspects of modernist reflexivity often directed against the making of objects into images, a kind of move to escape the sort of inevitable operations of commodification. A complicated argument, but one that is very much worth diving into. I wanted to put into the limelight here Anthea Callan's 2 volumes. She very much is a key figure in the material turn, especially in this zone that we've been interrogating together the last few days. And Lee Hendricks, her current exhibition at the Getty, which is in fact all about a whole corpus of graphic practices, both both in drawing and in printmaking in the second half of the 19th by the discovery of and the increasing commercial availability of what Lee calls black media. Also, of course, should have been on that slide, should have been Gloria Groom's triumphant exhibition of Van Gogh's bedrooms. Now, here's a bit of a ragbag of a category, but I hope you'll recognize, a lot of you out there, the affiliation between these things. I think that within this composite category, a lot of innovative work has been done. I've put together material culture, mass culture, thing theory, and costuming practices, everything from Michael Lege's work through Gloria Groom's important 2012 exhibition, Elizabeth Benjamin's application of thing theory in the analysis of Caillebott's interiors, and then Susan Siegfried and Terry Dolan's recent work foregrounding the various valences of costume. And then here comes the final category, and it's perhaps the most, I'm not going to say ragbaggish, I'll say heterodox, because that sounds more elegant. But I thought there's such a, I think one has to use the metaphor of the tsunami of innovative work just coursing out of the printing presses, focused on the art of the 19th century. And I thought, why not refer to the enlargement of the canon and or the canon seen otherwise? Or, this is not your aunt's social history of art. These are creatures of a different definition. I guess in my day we used to call them horses of a different color. Everything from, anyway, so Dario Gamboni, who's with us, his astonishing work on Redon and Gauguin, Andre Dombrowski, completely going at Cézanne's work from new perspectives, Bridget Alsdorf's, she focused upon Fontaine-Latour, but talking about sort of art made within the fashioning of a sense of collectivity and community rather than strictly individuality. Marnin Young's sort of rewriting the book on what practices actually were attracting the most attention in those years. Mark Gottlieb's astonishing account of Henri Regnault just about to appear. Jody Hauptmann's, we heard from one of the conservators yesterday, Jody Hauptmann's amazing exhibition. I'm being very neutral, aren't I? I see that now. Astonishing exhibition, which is up now at MoMA. And then last but not least, Margaret McNamade's very impressive new account of Delacroix. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you'll get this reading done, and we'll start discussing it probably tomorrow afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the incredibly informative talk. I have a page full of notes ready to go here. Our next speaker is Francesca Casadio, scientist. She's published in Scientific and Conservation and is charged with planning and carrying out scientific research in support of the preservation and study of the museum's collection. She's also a founding co-director of the Northwestern University Art Institute of Chicago's Center for Scientific Study in the Arts, also known as New Access. And she was a major contributor to the current Van Gogh exhibition. Please welcome her.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you everyone for being here. It's getting progressively harder to follow the previous speakers, so I'm glad I'm just going second. I have here a quote from Van Gogh. There's a quote for everything in his letter. This man really covered everything. And my role today is to be the yin or the yang to Hollis Clayson lecture. And when, at least at the beginning of her talk, she talked about the medium in terms of social, anthropological, historical medium of art. I'm going to talk about the medium of art in the sense of the stuff art is made of, and how advances in scientific tools can help us perhaps make new discoveries. Sometimes this kind of work has been compared to CSI. You see it in the news. And it's as old as light and energy around us. So as scientists and human beings discover what you see here, that there's different forms of light and energy that we can use to pierce through the human body, they quickly turn that eye to art, and we've become increasingly sophisticated, taken from CSI, and behind the scene here at the museum, we have a number of instruments that hopefully don't state the obvious. But I'm not going to talk about this today, really, but I would like to focus on three things that I think are really innovations that I'm hoping in this really interdisciplinary dialogue will allow to bring this new lens to art history. And this represents the work of many, many scientists and colleagues. So I stand here today about other people's work, which is great, so I cannot take any responsibility for it, but not the honor. And again, it's interesting that when we talk about technical art history and the investigation of paintings in particular, even nowadays, the newspaper was spectacular to show the behind the scene. They show X-rays. 19th century technology. It still teaches us a great deal. Here you see Kim Murray, one of our paintings conservator. And it has evolved also extremely from its beginnings. We used to paste X-ray sheets on a light box, and now in the bottom right there, you see, thanks to the work of colleagues like Rob Ehrman at the Rijksmuseum, similarly integrated imagery that, like medical imaging, allows you to see much more without the defects of having to combine all the different sheets. But what if that X-ray, in addition to being an image, could become a diagnostic tool? So what you see here is just a portion of an X-ray of our Van Gogh bedroom. And in a sense, in the past, conservators and art historians would take a lens and look through the morphology of the canvas and count the thread to search and get a kind of a barcode of the canvas to see whether things could then be compared and reunited based on this. And people would go through a lot of pain to make diagrams of these things, and then perhaps connections would be made, like this St. Francis kneeling in meditation of the Meadows Museum that had been discounted as maybe a work of the workshop or a copy, and based on the very proximity of, and perhaps this being a cutting from an autograph canvas of El Greco, this was an added element for the authentication. But then here comes computational power and the matrix, or the thread count automation project. How can we bring computational tools to the study of this problem? And this was really pioneered by the colleagues that I mentioned here before, but also in collaboration with Ella Hendricks, chief conservator at Van Gogh Museum, who really believed in this methodology and made the search of this from an academic experiment into an actual possibility that now, I would argue, 10 years after the beginning, a tool the experts and curators use routinely. And so you take an X-ray, and instead of counting manually, basically this academics have designed software that creates what we call density map of the threads and can count how many there are in the entire canvas as opposed to small spots. And then you can, at that point, see that barcode analogy and marry different canvases, which I will reveal in a second, and discover that they were cut from the sun. Now they've counted hundreds and hundreds of Van Gogh's painting, and they've been able to create these relationships where we can really go back and see him cutting the canvas and making paintings, including our very own Madame Roulin. The second tool that I think has really reached maturity is simply, again, harnessing the power of white light. And you see here on the left-hand side a detail from our Van Gogh's bedroom, which is upstairs. And if you just shine the light from the side, you can highlight the texture and really get to the physicality of the brushstroke. But what if we could quantify that? What if we could learn more from that? And here I'm citing the work of my colleague Mark Walton at NU Access. We're going back in time, but in a sense, the beginning of portraiture as we know it, Fayum portrait. And the idea, as scientists, we look at these objects and we think, what if we could separate color from texture? And what if we could measure this texture and this surface shape precisely? And we do this with actually pretty low-tech equipment and a very high-power computing algorithm, and basically we just shine a light around different dimensions and we're able to calculate exactly where that light is coming from. What are we going to get? In this case, we're able to measure exactly the thickness of the bristles of the brush that was used to paint these objects. And you may think, so what? Well, this is almost, to me, like the time machine, because then we can compare the thickness of brushes of different animals and realize that it was perhaps some sort of, perhaps a squirrel-type brush that they were using to paint. So we're really going back into the artist's studio, and then also understanding how the artists understanding more about workshop practice from this angle of starting from the object out, which is what we have used very much for our online catalogs that will be also discussed later on. The third innovation that I think is really ripe, these things get developed in laboratories, in academia, behind the scenes at museums, and they take a long time to really become tool that we can use. So the question there was, what if we could fingerprint paint? What if we could have an X-ray but in color? And in the past, we would use instruments that look a little bit like the ones you have on the left that take one point after the other, and without taking the smallest sample, can allow us to identify the pigments that the artists used. But now we have technology that we borrowed to study our own bedroom that has been developed specifically for the art market. And in this sense, I really take pride of the fact that sometimes the art objects drive innovations in engineering and in technology. And you can scan the entire surface, and basically it's a way, and with Van Gogh we have his letters ordering the pigments, not really of fact-checking Van Gogh's, but being able to really understand the palette without sacrificing any of the physical material from the surface. And so here, for example, and there's more in the exhibition, we're able to demonstrate the differences in the palette and the use of pigment here. I picked just a green pigment, Viridian. In the Amsterdam version, Van Gogh used emerald green, a different copper-based pigment. And in Chicago, we have this use of this chromium-based pigment. So again, it's just one small aspect, but it allows us, and hopefully the public in the gallery, to realize this. There are a lot of things that make these paintings different, not only the painting of the walls, the iconography, but also the materials, and he was certainly not painting by number. Another example of application of this technique is being able to see through black medium. This is something that X-rays cannot do. This is something that infrared cannot do. If you take an X-ray of a black material, you're not going to see very much. And with this technique, we've been able to look with Harriet Stratis through the ink layer of beautiful Gauguin prints and creating maps of the various pigment and material that the artist, Harriet, has discovered applied very likely on a glass pane in different color applications. And what I want to draw your attention to is this particular area where we see copper that, again, we correlate with the presence of emerald green. But if you look at the print now, the green pigment is gone. So we're seeing the artist's gesture of applying that green pigment and then decided to wipe it away. And this technique can bring us back to that moment in Gauguin's room or studio, wherever he was creating this. Harriet is thinking that probably some of this were made on his bed with rolling with a spoon or something. And it's a way for us to really connect with the artist as a maker. Another example that has been discussed extensively yesterday that this technique can help us doing, and here you see Madame Rouland's both in visible light and in ultraviolet light, where you see a specific pigment that Van Gogh used very much, using lake, that fluoresces very vividly, but you don't see a lot of pink that remains. And with this technique, we can basically take one element in this colorant that is bromine that we can map with this technique, and we can bring back the distribution of that pigment. Pink allows us to see the invisible and bring it back in the discussion with our colleagues in conservation and in art history to understand what it means. But certainly, seeing is the first step of understanding and making this visible. And sometimes we're lucky that some of this is still visible under the frame, but there are times when this is not the case. And one last example of this ability of this particular instrument that now is becoming more widespread in museum practice has to do with this beautiful Gogh painting in our collection. And Christine Lister, our paintings conservator, coming in it, and in looking at this particular detail, she realized that in the cracks of the paint, of the black paint, there were some evidence of red paint underneath, and this painting, on the other hand, doesn't show very many changes. In this case, a conventional X-ray doesn't show much. This is a jute painting, a jute support on which Gogh applied with a palette knife, very thick zinc-based ground. So there's not much that can be discerned this time by the X-ray per se, but using again the same type of energy, but in a diagnostic way to get this fingerprinting. What we were able to see is that not only this figure was you can see the head in the mapping of the lead white and the zinc white pigment has been moved several ways, but perhaps more strikingly is that you see there in the red and yellow dots, there is evidence that the background was painted in orange very vividly, orange tones representing perhaps a fire inside, and in fact, Christine noticed that the background sky was kind of was a sunset scene, so it made sense that initially there was some fire light showing from the painting itself. So this, to me, I wanted to present out there because are some of the tools of science that I and in curatorial practice. And there's always more that's being developed. The art really pushes us to try to develop new ways of scenes, and I just wanted to show a couple of, to me, very exciting development. John Delaney, who's been collaborating with us here, a scientist at the National Gallery, and really been a pioneer in developing this imaging material that also fosters this dialogue, if not transatlantic dialogue, certainly a transdisciplinary dialogue. And here, for the first time, he's able to do non-contact technique to look at the distribution of the medium, and this can allow us, again, to understand more about worship practices, about conservation conditions without having to take any samples. And this is more in a sense that you should add to your reading list that Holly already has given you. And it's some preliminary work that scientists have done at Duke where they can take a virtual cross-section without even taking a sample anymore and being able to see the layer structure, in this case of ultramarine layered over a red layer, without taking any samples. So science is not your enemy. This is not my quote. It's Steven Pinker from Harvard. And certainly at the museum, we're very excited that the tools of science are instruments that can go a long way in the future. And it's also with the Chicago Object Study Initiative something exciting to get involved in the larger academic dialogue. And of course, this is not done in isolation, but we bring this science to schools scholarly publications, exhibition, the media, our public program with museum education. And of course, one great example is here in the galleries, because science is not a mean to an end, but really it's one of these various dimensions, and maybe one of the lenses that can help us learn more, appreciate more, feel closer to this wonderful artist. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate your sense of humor in relation to a subject that can be quite intimidating. Next up is Gloria Groom, who is the David and Mary Winton Green Curator at the Art Institute of Chicago and Chair of European Painting and Sculpture. She's been involved in many, many monographic exhibitions here, including Gogh, Rodin, Caillebotte, Renoir, Manet, Seurat, and Toulouse-Lautrec. She also organized the thematic exhibition on the art dealer Ambroise Vollard in 2008, and that on Impressionism, Fashion, and Modernity in 2012-13. She came up with the idea for the current exhibition, Van Gogh's Bedrooms, and saw it through to fruition. I should also note that since 2009, she's led the Art Institute's project creating the monographic online scholarly catalog, collection catalogues devoted to the Impressionist collection that we'll be hearing about later. So please welcome her. Thank you.
I was just said that somebody should pay me every time my picture pops up on the screen, because if you remember last night, George. So the Art Institute is... The Art Institute has probably since the 1930s, since Kenneth Clark's in scientific investigation, has always been looking beneath the surface, especially in the 19th century, which is one of the crowns of our jewels here. And I'm just going to be speaking a little bit to give you a prelude to the Van Gogh exhibition. Some of the ways that we have used conservation science way in earlier times, but not in the exhibition galleries. I came in 1985, and since then, the Redon was really the first time that, in my tenure, and conservator in this case, Harriet Stratus, did a full study on the noirs and pastels, but it was to understand Redon's working methodology, but it was also to help us borrow works of art, because in those days it was pastels don't travel, and it was kind of like things on wood don't travel, pastels don't travel, and there was just a lockdown on anything that was made in not paint on canvas. And so through Harriet's research and being able to understand how we fixed some of the so that they would not be so friable, not so unstable, and how she was able to determine how we could travel them. And she went to look at things, and so we were able to use that information to get pastels here when you can't do an exhibition on Redon without the noirs, the charcoal drawings, and the pastels. But it was part of the catalog. It was not integrated into the exhibition space per se. And then beyond the easel, we didn't have a catalog section, but Faye Rubel went looking with me at every distemper, at all of the works that were done in Détrempe, this very friable medium of water-based tempera paint, which is applied with melted rabbit glue in Vuillard's case, and was again able to determine which ones, sadly, because sometimes I wanted one and she'd say, no, that can't travel, and that was too bad. But her information also went into the catalog essays, but was not a specific part of the exhibition per se. It was in 2001 that we really started looking and involving the conservation science into the story that we were telling, and that was in collaboration, of course, with the Van Gogh Museum, with Ella Hendricks, with Cornelia Perez at that time, and it was Christine Lister at the Art Institute, Inga Fiedler, and in the back of the catalog of these wonderful appendices that informed what the story that Douglas Druick and Peter Zegers were telling of the thread counts, and at this moment we were still counting the threads and counting the, so it wasn't the algorithm, there was no way to automatically do this, so it was a more painstaking approach, and the supporting ground analysis, and that enabled the conservators working with the curators to determine that there were a number of works that were done on jute, and that they were done in a sequential order and using the same kind of rationale that we heard last night from George, where he had that wonderful flip-flopping bolt. I don't have that. This is very static from the catalog. We were able to really put the chronology into order for the first time, and I think this might have been one of the first instances where this type of using the raw data and putting it together to really tell a chronology of when the things were made, which was so important when you add to the meteorological circumstances, whether it was sunny and they were outside or raining and they were inside, you could kind of determine from their letters and from 19th century meteorological maps what was going on. It was really Grand Jatte that we really focused on our painting, our Grand Jatte, and that we really got into the subject matter with a huge portion of the catalog devoted to various aspects of the scientific investigation by color scientist Roy Burns, by Frank Zuccari and Alison Langley at the Art Institute, and that work was infiltrating the essays that Bob Herbert wrote on the Grand Jatte itself, that we took the three basic chapters. One was how he enlarged from a smaller version to the larger version, the one at the Met being about a third the size, and how that would have been done, which no one had ever looked at before. The different from his own work that he talks about having started at a certain time, finishing, and then starting again, and then starting again. So we were able to determine with it which figures were laid on first, how the second campaign was the green you see in the background, and then right at the last minute, that monkey that we love so much was really an add-on at the very last minute. And so it was this kind of, and we had a small video, but the video was in an alcove, and we were very careful not to make it obligatory. In fact, you could walk right by it and still see the exhibition in its totality, and we didn't want it to bleed in, any of the noise to bleed in, and we were very careful to make it a part rather than an integral part of the exhibition. And this is just showing you how that video, some of the things that we used to be able to determine those different campaigns. And this was in the printed matter as well, but it was also brought to life in this video that some people saw. And at the very end, I remember this was Francesca's first, her initial foray at the Art Institute, and she wanted to do the effects of the darkening that we now know was this zinc yellow, which when mixed with other colors would change the color quite dramatically, even during Seurat's lifetime. And I remember it was just this little alcove and kind of a science fair poster that we had, and she was really proud of it, and we were proud of it, but it didn't do anything. It just sat there. So it was only with the initiative of the Getty, when they invited us to participate in the online scholarly catalogs, that we really, really started thinking about our collection, our permanent collection. Up to then, it had always been a painting or paintings that were part of an exhibition idea, and the money was coming through the exhibition budget. But with the help of the Getty, we were really able to focus on our 19th century, starting with our 33 Monets, which allowed us to have this kind of wonderful focus group, and our Renoirs, our 17 Renoirs. And we are still working on this project, which brings together so many from the community of scientists, but also our art historian friends in universities and museums that are helping us either by writing for the catalogs or by being a peer reviewer. So it's a project that is expanding and in very interesting ways. It is the project that we felt needed to bring together all of the aspects of one object, and Nosan will be talking about it, the research, the archives, the scientific, object-based research from which we would write the entries and include the science as an integral part of that entry. He'll be talking more about the interactives, how we develop tools so that we could give the raw materials to the general public and they could see what we see in the laboratory. Oh, I don't mean for that to be moving, so let me get out of there. Then we brought that kind of animated catalog and that research and that way of thinking about our collection into the gallery as an exhibition, specifically for Madame Clapisson, where the Red Lakes had changed dramatically in the background, and we just took over the 226, the Gogh Gallery, for a small exhibition that was, let me see if this works. I don't know how to do this without a, and we did an interactive so that you could see the OSCE catalog. Oh my gosh, okay, well, we don't really need that, but anyway, you can see how the catalog format was coming to life and how you could use it in the gallery itself, so the printed being active, and that's enough of that. And then simply to show you how the background has changed. It should have looked more like this when it was painted in the 1880s, and how it has changed to now. And there's just an example of what we were doing, and we gave the physical reality, what that cochinelle that went into making the Red Lake, and all of the ways you can see it, and how we faded out and force fading. So then Van Gogh's bedroom really is the culmination of many years of testing these different ways out and really bringing conservation into the gallery space itself and making it not just a part of the story, but really a great part of the story. From the very beginning, we knew, because of the research done in 2001 with the Van Gogh Museum and all of our research done over the years, we knew that this was going to be the meat of the matter, that the story was about the three-bedroom scene for the first time together since 1990 in Amsterdam, but the first time in America. And it was also going to include all of the questions we asked and answered through the research. This was a schematic from the very beginning. We were going to give a large space so that we had plenty of ways to look at it, but also not detract from the paintings themselves, that it would be not separate in its own alcove, but rather be its space where you could go back to the paintings but never be distracted in any way, or to think that we were trying to say that that you have screens next to paintings, which I don't believe in. So we hired a crew, we hired an agency because we didn't know how to actually visualize this within the galleries, and Blue Cadet in Philadelphia, they showed us their stuff, so to speak, and how they worked for other museums on animation. We had nice meetings with them where we thought about it, and we told them what our plans were. We showed them storyboards, and we really needed them to get into our world in big time, because they could do all the technology, but without the storyline, it doesn't matter. At first, we had a biography we thought we were going to do, and then that fell by the wayside. And then we thought we were going to do this kind of censura sound with the bedrooms. But then that became problematic, and also we thought people were going to throw up, that it was going to be just too much, and that you really wouldn't have any way out. So we did a lot of testing. And then it was kind of one of those moments where we have a discussion, where interpretation and education was really wanting us to add these kinds of in-depth moments to our immersive screen and the conservation. Sometimes you don't want any information, you just want to look. And so we worked hard on getting that. That was what was proposed. Also, we thought it was a disaster to have a guide, a kind of a joystick that all the public could use, and that could be a 5-year-old kid, and that wouldn't work. And so we finally ended up with this immersive 18-foot screens and the kiosks at the side as our area where the in-depth motion. So we have this where we would go in, and we felt that this was very important because when you're looking at the bedrooms, they're too far apart to be able to see them simultaneously and to really see the differences, especially when we have crowds. But if you get this kind of information, you can return to the bedrooms and really know what they're about. Let me see if I can get the next one to go on. And that's just one of those moments where he talks about the broken paint and the red tiles, and you can just see how very, very different these bedrooms, which sometimes reproduce very similarly, and people didn't realize how many differences there are between the three. I'm trying to get pleased with that because all of the information. This really down in getting further into the weeds went into the kiosk where we could ask questions and make it interactive. And simple diagrams like this is Alison Perlman's trying to get Blue Cadet to know what we needed, how it would be ordered. I mean, just kind of working, because that is the thing. You have to really have the storyline and storyboards for them to create what they needed. And they ended up doing something we think is quite effective, where you can really see how in the Amsterdam version, the portraits weren't there at the beginning. They were added almost a year later. Happy colleagues to show how this area becomes its own thing separate from the paintings. So the catalog itself offered immense information, intense information of all of these, and this is amazing too that you have these multiple authors. This never happens in art history, but scientists tend to work together happily, and they can sign their names to one thing, which we just don't do. And all of this kind of information had to be culled through, made into a story, made into a simple story, knowing that the public was not going to read every single one of those subheadings. All of this information, and then we looked at other videos to see how they did things. How would you do a cross-section and animate it and bring it to life? And then some of our eureka moments, how would you do that? Simple diagrams that went into the final sophisticated video that we feel has so much to do with the exhibition. And when you're talking about, I think this does have sound. It should be Francesca speaking.
Of the color
There
and the
she
color
is.
change.
Yeah.
So we removed a small
And just the
sample
idea
from the
of
walls
making this so
mounted it
simple,
as
but at
as a
the same
cross-section,
time giving
which is basically
the
like a
audience
layer cake,
enough.
exposing the
And we're
layers
finding
from
people
the
are
preparation of the
stopping
canvas up to the
and
top.
really watching the 7 or 8
While the
minute
top
video, which
of
started
the
out to
wall
be 8 or
paint
9, and then it was 15
light
minutes, and then we
blue.
kept having to
Inside the
redo
layer,
it.
There were many particles of
And I
bright
think the
pink
graphics are
pigment.
so
And of
clear
course,
that it
pink and
becomes
blue
something
makes
that people understand and walk
Even if
away
it's
with after
microscopic, you
they've
cannot
seen
see
the
with your
story, the
naked eyes.
biographical
It's bigger
story.
than one
They get
pigment
the
particle, and it was
beneath
really
the surface.
The eureka moment. Like
Okay,
now,
I'm trying to make that go away now. Is that possible? There. So what can we think about for the future? Well, already just the studies we've done on our Monets have already given us ideas for exhibitions. For example, we think now it would be fantastic to take Jill Shaw's research on the 6 grain stacks in our collection with all of the science and technology that we've learned, how many changes were made in these seemingly straightforward series of grain stacks. We think of him just painting one, then the other, but actually each one was a series of calculations. So we're taking that information and thinking about a future exhibition on that. As Harriet Stratus has explained yesterday, we're using what we have now worked on for these OSCE catalogs to bring into an exhibition that will happen next summer right here, Gauguin, Artist as Alchemist, where we talk about his painting methods and how that works. And the, oh, that didn't quite work. Oh, here we go. Okay. And I can imagine already that some of this technical information in these ways that Gauguin morphed and he kind of personalized every one of his woodcuts, and how important that is to the whole Noah and the phenomena of Noah, his semi-biographical, how that is going to work in the galleries and how we're going to use that to tell our story and enrich it, not to take away from it. As always, there are many people involved in this, and that's what I love about it. It's changed our curatorial field to something that's much richer, that we have the millions of art history now, which I'm so happy Holly gave us, to know that the 19th century is alive and kicking in new ways. But it's also this kind of in the room itself that makes the room live and makes the exhibition come alive. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that fascinating insider view. Our next and final speaker is Greg Nosan, who is the editorial director of the Department of Publishing here at the Art Institute. His work ranges from wall subjects ranging from land, and taught courses in literature and editorial practice at the University of Chicago and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and the Bard College Clementi course. Please welcome him.
Thanks, Martha. Can you all hear me properly? Okay. Well, unlike Francesca, I don't mind going last. And I suspected rightly, that you would all give me the perfect setup, and you did. You've made my job this morning very easy indeed. So now that you've heard Martha and Hollis and Francesca and Gloria talk about both the context within which we're working, the technologies in play, and how we're presenting them to the public in exhibition settings, I want to go a step further and outline very briefly the new developments at the intersection of publishing, scholarship, and technology, as demonstrated in the Art Institute's digital scholarly catalogs. As Gloria had showed you, we've now, and I'm showing you again here, we have now developed 6 online catalogs and have 6 more on the way. Here, you see a glimpse of the page on the museum's website where you can access the full range of our digital publications. Just look under collections and then books, and presto, there you'll find us. First, however, I want to give you a little bit of a background that'll help you understand how we got to this point. In 2009, as Gloria suggested, the Getty Foundation afforded the Art Institute, along with 8 other peer institutes, afforded us the resources and the opportunity to create a new prototype for a born digital online scholarly publication. The Getty understood, first of all, that publishing scholarly collection catalogs is a critical part of a museum's mission. They involve meticulous research, offering detailed information that ensure that the individual works in our collection earn themselves a place in art history. But the Getty also realized that what we in the field already knew, that these volumes are expensive to produce, difficult to update, and so full today often exceeds the allotted space we have to say it in. They're also difficult to sell. Indeed, here at the Art Institute, we typically print between 500 and 1,500 copies, most of them likely sold to libraries. All in all, scholarly collection catalogs are amazing things that are hampered by the constraints of their traditional printed format. As the Getty put it, in a way that I really like, one could say that scholarly collection catalogs are like thoroughbred horses confined to stock pens. Our task, and that of the other museums you see on this list, was to figure out how to let that horse run free, each in our own way. To put it more plainly, we were challenged in this project with creating sustainable models for publishing online scholarly collection catalogs that maintain the scholarly rigor of our printed ones, and at the same time take full advantage of the digital format's increased capacities. We think we've arrived at such a model and have published, since the debut of our catalogs on the works of Monet and Renoir, 4 more, 2 of them on Ensor and then on Whistler and Roussel, online exhibition catalogs. But I'd encourage you to check out the websites of the partner institutions I mentioned before, because they'll show you that the model we've devised for our own online catalogs here at the AIC is just one of many, as each institution customized their approach to fit their own needs and that of the artworks that they were exploring. To some extent, the results to date speak for themselves. Whereas before, we were selling maybe 1,000 books, as I said, to art libraries. Already, these digital catalogs have been accessed for free over 60,000 times by more than 40,000 users from 143 countries. And this is current as of yesterday afternoon, so things I'm sure have changed. This is a much wider reach than any of our printed publications. Furthermore, we're able to track the usage statistics to guide our ongoing improvements to current and future digital catalogs. As you may have gleaned from one of the previous slides, indeed, most, indeed almost all, of our online catalogs have been on 19th century subjects. It seems to me that this happened for a few reasons. One had to do with the areas of our collection that we had already published in an exceptional series of printed catalogs, such as the one you see here on Northern European and Spanish paintings. As you can see, the approach in these printed publications was both visually and textually comprehensive and systematic, with fully footnoted and edited curatorial entries, technical notes, provenance, references, exhibition histories, and large color plate images, along with technical images, comparative illustrations, and details. We had simply not yet undertaken a similar systematic exploration of our 19th century pictures, and the time seemed ripe to do so. At the same time, again as Gloria forecast or explained to you, we had already established a record of extensive technical work in the context of our exhibitions of 19th century art, and that was something that we were eager to continue. Here you see the cover and a few choice images from the 2004 catalog for our exhibition Seurat and the Making of Le Grand Jatte. The image at upper right, for instance, shows a comparison of the contours of the promenading couple in the initial state, visible in red, and the intermediate state, also visible in X-ray in blue, and the final state, which is in green. So as we decided to focus on our 19th century collection in order to take advantage of both our current strengths and the amazing chance to do all new research on one of the very strongest areas of our collection, we also had to figure out how we wanted to present that research in a digital environment. To do this, we relied on the cumulative experience of researchers, catalog writers, editors, and others who create and use these very kinds of scholarly publications on a regular basis. This research team spent many hours brainstorming what we wanted this to do for us and for the other researchers and scholars who'd be using it. We wanted to acknowledge that research can be done in different ways with a digital catalog, that the facts of research are the same as they always have been, but the way people use those facts is different, and they can be gathered differently and accessed differently in a digital format. Here, you see the beginnings of what we came up with in this example page from our Monet catalog, which shows the beach at Saint-Adresse from 1867. There's much here that reminds us both of a traditional scholarly catalog and an exhibition catalog like Seurat and the Making of the Grand Jatte. We have a tombstone caption, which is what you see right under Cat 13, a curatorial entry, and a large color illustration. But as we'll see, you can click on the figure callout. Actually, we're not going to see that, I'll just tell you. If you would want to, you could click on the little map at the lower right, and it would, oh, no, I didn't mean to do that, but it would get bigger. You could also, oh, thanks. I don't know if I'm controlling this or someone else's, but it doesn't really matter. If we were to look also at the bottom of the tombstone, where we have the credit line in blue, we have the hyperlink that says the Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Larned Coburn collection. If we click on that, it takes us to a detailed collector's page, where you receive more information about the excellent Annie Swan Coburn, her collecting practices, the story of her life, and even photographs of her paintings in situ in her elegant apartment in Chicago's Blackstone Hotel. This traditional section on exhibition history is also right where you'd expect it. But now readers are given direct electronic access to entire exhibition catalogs and other documents. You just click on the hyperlink of the 1933 Century of Progress exhibition, for example, in which this painting was shown, and there you are. The idea is that what a digital publication can do that a traditional printed one can't is to let readers see primary research documents, the materials from which we draw our conclusions, and use them to draw their own. It's a way of both saving readers time, giving them as much access to our own archives as we can, and making our own research process more alive and transparent. The same is true for provenance, or ownership history. Readers of this entry, for example, would learn that Mrs. Kober bequeathed this work to the Art Institute, and then they can get immediate access to her will itself so that they can see the terms of the bequest. As the last slide suggested, some of the documentation we're offering is not published, but rather archival and otherwise very difficult to access. So we created an other documentation section at the end of the entry in which users are able to access images of the labels on the back of the frame, which you see at the bottom, or see a comprehensive list of all the Art Institute images of the artwork in question, with full information on when they were made and what exactly they contain, should you want to access one yourself. While we want readers to feel that they own this material, in a sense, through their ability to access it and do what they will with it, we also want them to feel a sense of ownership over the publication itself, that it's theirs and that they can customize it. For that reason, users can create an account and log in to personalize their copy of the catalog. You can add post-it notes that are attached to the paragraph of interest and create tags that are searchable. These annotations will remain there as you page through the catalog, and you can continue to edit them as you go along. You can save them to your own copy or account, and they'll be private and only visible when you are logged in. In other words, we've tried to remain mindful of our original scholarly audience and their needs, of the printed books that these online catalogs replace. Everything is still rigorously edited and peer-reviewed. There's an ever-present image of the main work under discussion, a fixed publication date with a persistent link, but now complete with powerful search functions and able to be easily revised and or expanded to include objects and other media. We've also made the catalog easy to cite with a tool that enables readers to use either the MLA or Chicago formats. But back to the content itself. The curatorial entry for each object highlights important new findings. As an example, let's look again at the Beach at Sauna dress. As we've seen, the digital format empowers viewers to see all the data we've gathered and evaluate it themselves. Here, that also includes a more extensive technical report incorporating new information from recent examinations that we made of Monet's painting, which itself includes more comparative illustrations and technical images, such as cross-sections of paint samples and x-rays. Each entry also includes multi-layer interactive images, which we saw a bit of earlier. Here, for example, we've overlaid an image taken in natural light with one captured by an X-ray. The bottom scroll bar allows us to move between these overlaid images and select other conservation images to overlay, such as transmitted infrared reflectograms. These images are annotated with the conservator's drawings to outline visible figures. With the use of these tools, we can see here that the ghostly outlines of sailboats on the right edge of the horizon and of a group of figures to the lower right. These images show early stages of the composition that included additional figures of tourists, not fishermen. Viewing them and the annotation simultaneously gives us a key to the evolution of the painting and allows us to make connections to other works Monet painted at this time. These additions also provide a way for the reader to better understand the observations that conservators and curators see and test our hypotheses. In a recent online scholarly catalog on Gustav Caillebotte, we've included video links. As you'll learn later today from Kelly Keegan and Pablo Garcia, careful examination of the sketch Study for Paris Street Rainy Day suggested that the artist may have used an optical device known as a camera lucida during the preliminary stage of his work. Here, we just saw Pablo in Paris at the location of Caillebotte's scene, demonstrating how the camera lucida might have been employed in the creation of this drawing. In upcoming volumes, our readers will have the ability to turn three-dimensional works of art around themselves in order to see the complete object from every angle, as you can see here. We'll utilize this feature particularly in the two catalogs we have in development now, one on Roman art, which has lots of glass and sculpture, and the other on Indian art of the Americas. And you see an example from that book publication here. In short, it's fair to say that the digital catalog platform has revolutionized how research on Art Institute collections is conducted, presented, accessed, and utilized. We're better able to highlight new art historical research. Unprecedented high-resolution imaging allows readers to zoom in to see the artist's brushstrokes. We can share previously unpublished technical photography that reveals information beneath the surface of an artwork. And users can individualize this online resources, making it their very own. Best of all, taking full advantage of the digital format's increased capacities, the Art Institute's online publication presents both the conclusions put forth in the curatorial entries, as well as direct access to the original archival and conservation materials, allowing end users to form their own opinion. What's more, as Gloria suggested, these projects have brought together curators, researchers, editors, scientists, conservation scientists, and other authors, not just from the Art Institute, but really from around the world, together in unprecedented ways. Indeed, they've changed who our authors are and how they work together, pulling them together into what has been so far a compelling and ever-changing and completely engaging enterprise. Thanks very much.
We sit in the order we spoke. You want to sit in the order we spoke? So Howard is there. Okay. You're there, Greg. Okay. Huh?
We each have our microphone. Oh, I have the hot seat here.
Look what I have. Do we all have?
And they're all different colors, and they look
Okay.
like popsicles.
So we now are entering into the panel discussion part of our program this morning. And I think we'll start with a discussion among ourselves of a couple of questions and then open this up to questions from you. We have about 15 minutes for our discussion. So let me throw out a big floppy question that's on my mind.
Would that be sloppy or floppy?
Both. I found myself thinking about all the challenges that these innovations in what's presented in exhibitions and the collaboration of science now and art history and all that we learned yesterday about recolorization and thinking about the moment of creation of works in a different way from under a scientific lens. All of that has posed big challenges to me as someone who teaches art history and has to think about how to do things differently, to conceptualize them differently. So I'm just wondering what sorts of challenges do you find engaging and productive as you look to the future in the next couple of years, thinking about where you think the collaboration of science and art history might go, should go, is not yet ready to go,
Is that big and floppy enough? Yeah, so let's just open this up. We started with an interesting discussion this morning, interesting for me, of the limitations that you'd faced in designing the catalogs in terms of how much material could be put online.
Well, it's an interesting question. One of the things that we were talking about was this transformation of the printed scholarly collection catalogs into an online version. And Marty was asking me, we were talking about the content, and Marty was saying, well, but you don't have limitations, of any kind in the OSCE projects. You can do as much as you like. You can have as many images as you like. You can have as many words as you like. And, to some extent, that's true, or we thought it was true. But what we've learned over time is that even OSCEs can be, that we thought this was a limitless platform, that it could hold as many images and as many words as we pleased. What we found out is that it did have a limit. And for one of our recent projects, we had to actually scale back the number of images and the amount of words that we had in order to have it work properly. So we came up against a kind of a fantasy of a publishing vehicle that wouldn't ask us to make the kind of hard choices and impose the sort of limitations on ourselves that we all know are good for us to have. So I feel as that we're, I think going forward, what we'll do is understand what the shape of the limitations are. We'll explore the many possibilities that these online publications and the sorts of collaborative research, that they present to us can take. But we'll also, maybe get more comfortable with using the possibilities we have, but maybe not using all of them all the time.
Blue always goes before red.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that was good. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
I think the balance is very important. And George was saying last night that you can use the tools, but the tools have to be for something. And in the exhibition, we thought about that: is how much is too much. And I mean, we were surprised that this very low-tech timeline is one of the most popular items of the exhibition, and people were lining up to the point where we had to make an app out of it, so that you're coming here to see the paintings, use the app at home or in line waiting, and go see the paintings. So there is a balance, and I think in terms of your students, Marty, is there is a way to use the internet to find facts and layer facts and facts and facts and go down that rabbit hole, and that you obviously.
I've been thinking about this with this online catalog.
Yeah,
now,
so you
and
don't want to
do
do that.
The nature of a lecture
Exactly.
and the kinds of materials you have to provide.
Right.
And also when they write a paper,
Yeah.
it's all very available to them.
I can tell you that does this work? Oh, it does. That very thing that Marty has just evoked cost me some tossing and turning last night. I think, one of the great things about teaching at a university that's more or less adjacent to a great art museum like this is that you can use it as the laboratory, the clubhouse, the ancillary space of education in your art history classes. And now two things. Now I have to figure out what to do about it. The online catalogs provide not only an extraordinary wealth of information that prevents them from having to set foot in a library, but also the quality of the imagery in some way makes the absolutely obligatory trip to the museum have a slightly different kind of urgency. And I've already been thinking that I think I might warm to the idea of making the in-person encounter in the museum encompass more sort of, environmental, phenomenological, sociological material than I would have welcomed hitherto, so that they would actually be more involved with a very analytical assessment of many aspects of their encounter with artworks in the museum. And also, of course, you know, the specter of recolorization. I probably will never sleep well again, thanks a lot. You know, that, you know, you insist that they look closely and then look again and then maybe set their watches and don't move for 40 minutes. No, that blue, it was actually purple. But keep looking, just keep looking, you know. So I think that as Marty said, this is going to have, you know, it's going to have, maybe we don't think about it, we think about academy-based scholarship, museum-based scholarship, but in terms of art historical pedagogy, this is going to catapult us into, I think, you know, some very new, necessarily some new approaches, which I'm feeling rather optimistic about.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah. At the same time, I'm not sure what to do with them. You know, it's an experience, it still feels very new from where I sit. Maybe not so much, I mean, you gave us a very useful genealogy of developments at the Art Institute, which made me realize this has been coming for a while, and I hadn't quite reckoned
that was a great
with
reminder.
the extent to which it had gained momentum, but also changed in terms of what was possible, right? And I wonder, Francesca, as you look from your vantage point at challenges in the future, things you can do, can't do, would want to do?
Well, to me, what is really stimulating, and in fact, the and with students through the COSI program has really been eye-opening for me. And it was actually some conversation with you, Marty, where, for example, we have the tools now to identify these pigments and their color change, and that sort of prompted some reflection. I remember you mentioned, well, you know, when I said that 70% of the colors on Van Gogh's palette were not invented 70 years before, and from your vantage point, you started just throwing the question, this was just a brainstorming in a sense, but could we look at the awareness of these artists if there was any other motivation of wanting to use the materials of the moment, not for their color, but for their social significance? Or is it, we talked yesterday about the fact that there wasn't very much an awareness, we see in Van Gogh's letters, of the fact that these colors would change, and yet that they use them, and they use them boldly, so sort of looking at exhibition, commentaries, and seeing how were these perceived as too bold? Like, are there comments on the color? So to me, what is really stimulating is this intersections of sort of the thinking outside of the box, the perspective, this dialogue with academic art historians and museum curators forces us to think of questions, or maybe brings up questions that we didn't anticipate before. So when Hollis says, well, that the art historians of today are talking about the big questions of today, you know, the environment, global warming, and looking at the ecology of the Anthropocene. But in a sense, also this focus that starts from the science and from the micro to explode it into the. I think that's really stimulating.
Yeah, yeah. And a big challenge.
And a challenge,
right?
and a
It's
challenge.
Not easy.
Absolutely.
I think the COSI program has been really exhilarating for me because it is difficult to go from the sorts of issues that Holly's talking about materials in the moment of creation. There's the two are sometimes at opposite extremes, and how do you narrow those big questions down enough that they dovetail with that research?
You want at the same time not in certain conditions to bring about again what we used to talk about glibly, the two art histories.
Yeah.
Because I think there's also one of the things that threat is much too strong a word, but that people who are like me, I've never been involved in COSI, and I don't know as much as I probably should know about technical art history, and it can be both. I mean, somewhat, it's so unfamiliar, and it can be intimidating, and one can just stick with one's big questions and the sort of routines of interrogating material artifacts in terms of extrinsic perspectives and interdisciplinary approaches and so forth, it could in some ways roll us back into another version of the two art histories if we don't really have our eyes open and really talk about this quite a lot.
Yeah, no, I think, Gloria, you've raised your...
Do I look like I want to say something? Yeah, I do. I just think it's one of the things that, now that information is so available and now that we're making more of the beneath the surface information, it's that ability to synthesize and to see it not as technical art history and that's it, but as part of art history. It's letting it in, and it's, you use that and you're mindful of it, but you don't necessarily... In the OSCE program, we started with it because this was what we were contributing to a very already well-trodden field of Monet studies, so there's no reason to repeat everything that's been written, but it gave us something new to say about our object in the museum. But I don't think that's necessarily the starting point for art history. I think it's just something that's there, and it's the making and meaning I think we've always been excited about of an object, and that just needs to be part of that conversation as we look to colonial art, as we look to all of these different ways of thinking about materiality and what makes an object. So I don't see it as divorce. I see it as we're all working together for a better, clearer 360 on what we're talking about.
And do you find that you, in the publications, how do you balance the amount of technical art history that you include over and against the more general?
I don't know that we, and Gloria, you may want to chime in here. I don't know that I at least think about it as a question of balance. I think about it more,
or make it intersect.
Yeah, that maybe is more. It's a question, and maybe not even so much of complementarity as it is of integration. And one of the things that Gloria alluded to, and if I had more time, I might have talked about, were the actual ways in which that the collaborations between scientific and technical authors and curatorial authors, or art historians, I guess, have changed the sort of writing that we publish here, and have changed the kind of work we do. I mean, my sense of what Gloria does and what her conservation colleagues are doing is that they read one another's and all the way through. And so we're talking less about containers of information in these catalogs, as that we're talking about that information that's.
And can I just
Yeah,
jump in again?
go ahead. Yeah.
We invite the authors, because we are not writing all of these ourselves, good grief, no. But so we invite the authors, one of whom is Dario Gamboni, who's in the audience, to come and to work with us. So we don't ask them to do something that we're not already doing, which is to look at the art with the conservators, talk about it, have conversations, so their entry, the writing grows out of conversations rather than containers. So it's not so daunting, because it's a process.
Yeah, I think, my understanding was we were supposed to talk. I'm obeying rules here that I
tell other people what to do. I'm sorry.
But yeah, we can open this up to be sure for questions. Yes.
Do not show any more pictures. You are off the podium.
I will have a little on
Banned from the podium.
Is this on? I would just say, I'll sit down here and make it more comfortable. I just want to say, for the benefit of your trustees, Gloria, and for all the people from Chicago who will be listening to this, and the people who aren't specialists in this audience, nobody does this as well as Chicago does. And with all due respect to everybody else, this is being better done at the Art Institute of Chicago than elsewhere, and I think it's more engagingly done, more readable, more understandable. And to your to the ladies of the universities, your students are going to tell you how to react to this, because I think they're going to get into it and find it. If you push them there, I think they'll help you figure out how do you engage with this kind of research, because I think the younger the people are, the more they're going to think of new ways to look at it and to use it.
I'm smiling because I know you're right, and the first thing they're going to discover is, this is awesome, we don't have to go to the museum.
Yeah, now, but that's where, I mean, you don't make it a date night necessarily. That's your other sociological idea, that you could make it, there has to be some reward there. But no, but I think that's where you have that you take everything you've learned and then you have to look at the thing. I mean, you really do go back to Maurice Denis and say, before it's a battleship or a flower, it is an arrangement of paint and color on the surface of a canvas in some particular order. I paraphrased it wrong, but it is a thing, and I think that Chicago's treatment of this is really quite exceptional. I wanted to ask you, Gregory, what is the largest number of objects that is in any one of your catalogs, or your projected catalog down the line?
Oh,
like
Lord.
American Silver, for instance.
That's a hard question to answer, George.
Is it going to be 100 objects? Is it going to be 200 objects?
I'm now working on this weekend, actually finishing up a catalog of our ancient American collection, and I think that we have 300 and some objects in that printed publication, and they'll be all featured in the online version, although it's a slightly different, that's going to be a slightly different approach where we won't drill quite as deeply into that.
So many different side holes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's surprising. I mean, I think that the Kaibot project we thought was going to be a real straight shot, because how many objects were there, Gloria? Like 7, 5? I knew it was some sort of odd number under 10. But what was interesting about that is that our research on that object revealed so much that the object entries that we had were unusually deep. So sometimes the numbers will fool you.
Okay. I have one final question. Can you measure it all? You've measured your 60,000 hits from 40,000 different people. Is there any way of measuring how long they stay and how much they read?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Great.
Yeah.
And that's surprising too, because people are really staying longer than we would expect, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, which means they're using it, not just browsing.
And we can also tell where the users are coming from. Are they coming in from, are they academic users or not? So it's really just a question of what we want to know.
Do you get to track how far they go down each road? Is that measured? I mean, can you figure out, they go to the entry, can you figure out what button in it they click?
I'm not so sure that we can do that yet.
I think it's just a time element.
That would be great to know, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a metric that may not be invented.
It would help us sort of answer some of the questions that I was talking about asking before, yeah.
So we have another question, just...
Traffic jam.
Yeah, traffic jam. So, yes, in red.
I've never been to one of these before, so I don't know how it works. I'm the audience. I'm not in academia. I am not an artist, and I don't know that much about Van Gogh. But I wanted to make a comment just quickly on greats for us as the audience, is that before I come to any exhibition, I read all the stuff that you guys are producing. I come to all the lectures, and then I'll go to the exhibition so I can understand what's going on. What I am is I do work in marketing. I'm a marketing strategist. The question earlier about how do you track all this stuff online is Google Analytics, and you can see how many people are actually clicking on a page, staying on a page, and analyzing it in the flow through the website. That's the stuff that I look at. I'm a bean counter by day and not an artist by night. So I just want to let you know that's how I'm using your information, and I think it's great, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your enthusiasm.
There have been some questions about quantifying viewership, and I'm wondering if, for the sake of those of us in other museums who are contemplating doing these things, if you've quantified the staff time and loads on the institution, because they are considerable, and it would be helpful to everyone else.
That is such a good comment, because the first thing people ask when I present an OSCE to another institution is, how much is it going to cost? And we were blessed with the Getty grant for the first 5 years, and so we were able to hire different people to help us. We use staff as well, And now that's exactly what we're trying to do now, is figure out, it's a different type of publishing, but it's still publishing. It still requires an editor. It still requires a lot of the photo orders. Everything has to happen. And how much of this is sustainable given our staff now, or because we spent hours and hours. We actually had to present our hours to the Getty, and sometimes we had a full-time person. Jill Shaw was in the audience. She was a full-time working on the Monet and Renoir catalogs. So that is something that has to be factored into the equation, and why we're using outside authors as well, and conservation. And so we're trying to figure out how we're going to expand in that direction to allow this kind of in-depth research to continue in the, right? Do you want to speak to that? I mean, do you want to talk about your grant? The Granger.
You can tell us about all of that.
Well, yes. The Conservation Department received a generous grant from the Granger Foundation that supports all our activities, but in general, for these catalog projects, we've been able in the past to fundraise, to have a scientist dedicated, as Harriet was mentioning, and before, for the Monet and Renoir and Pissarro, to supplement the work that Inga has been doing and colleagues in science and in conservation have been doing. There are certainly very labor-intensive endeavors, but we're looking at making them more sustainable, yeah.
And I think the more we can integrate what we're doing with the permanent collection catalogs with exhibitions, with other ways of using them in the galleries, I mean, the more we can make them mesh with the inventory we already have online to be able to push out more information, it makes sense that it's not just a separate, again, it's not in a container, it's part of our world that will help. But it is a constant question. Hi, Daria.
A few questions about the OSCE catalogs, and maybe I should know, but I'll ask them, because maybe other people ask themselves too. One is about maintenance, since this is not something that is just out, it's printed, and you may store it, or people buy it, but you have to keep it accessible, and it's a complicated thing, so how do you see that? And what kind of attribution of resources does that also mean in the long run, not just now? Another thing is, you mentioned the fact, and it's of course a great aspect of online publishing, is that you can update, you can modify. But I also remember that part of the idea, the way it was planned here, is to have also the advantages of the scholarly catalog, which means authored and dated. And so you know that this was written at that moment with that state of information. And I must admit I have not planned to go back to my entries each year either. But nonetheless, there is this possibility, which can be great, and you have mentioned something to that. And the last question is, I find it absolutely extraordinarily laudable as an enterprise and really a game changer, including the fact of giving access to the public, and the public in general, which includes specialists of all sorts of fields, which include, but to primary materials, to a lot of what is in conservation history, documents, including collector's will, and so on. This is wonderful. I mean, in terms of giving access, of transparency, it is wonderful. But that will mean also that not only is it great that one can annotate one's digital copy, but you may expect very useful information coming back from your audience, which again includes these other specialists in all sorts of fields who will come with information one did not know about. Now, what have you planned in terms of conduits for this conversation, this broader and large conversation to take place and to profit to everyone, including by way of the catalog?
So, I mean, I'm happy to talk about some of those things. Gloria, I was wondering if you might know more about the question of archivability of this than I have. I know that the issue is one that we're trying to work through, but I'm not sure about the details of the ways in which we're thinking about making sure that these catalogs live, in perpetuity in so much as we can help them do so. What I know more about is the question that you brought up in terms of having this be each catalog or being a kind of a dated, editioned package, so that when you're referring to one of these publications as opposed to another, when you're citing it, it's an edition, that was sort of signed and sealed at a particular moment. And our concept is, I think, that as we update these catalogs, we will re-edition them so that it's clear what changes were made and when, and that you're looking at an updated version, but you'll also, I believe, have access.
So they will actually exist in multi-editions? So we'll have the 2009 edition, the 2030
No.
edition?
There is a concept of the Library of Congress number, so it will have a place, and from that there will be different variations on that. But it will have a number, and we're looking. I think there's a lot of people that were involved in the Getty project are looking into how we can make this Library of Congressable, if that's a verb, if that's an adjective, so that it exists not as a website but as a publication. And so far, Dario, we haven't figured out how to do what you just thought. So far, we hang in and telling us.
Oh, but Gloria, you remember didn't the French family just write in with a correction on the spelling of their last name? That was kind of cool.
The spelling of the last name, so that happens, yeah. And
well, it's more interesting than what I'm making it out to be.
But we haven't had any debatable things. No one has written and said, you're full of nothing of that stuff. So I don't know what we're going to do with that. That may be a curator thing at the first, or a scientist, or it may be a direct line. And we really haven't had anyone wanting to chat with us.
Yeah, and it is a sort of a question of interactivity and whether we want to build in a way to do that, or do we want it to?
We thought about that, but then we thought, do we want to spend the rest of our lives babysitting something that we've just done and we need to move forward? So we haven't actually. It's still in discussion, and we don't really have an answer to that.
Good. Is that?
My stomach's growling.
One more question. One more question, and then I think we'll call it a day because stomachs are grumbling up here.
I'm so hungry.
For Holly, and perhaps also for Francesca, but starting with Holly, sort of how do you see some of these findings or some of these technologies or ways of looking at art entering the classroom? I mean, have they impacted how you teach your courses? Have you seen it impacting how other people teach their courses? Francesca, have you been invited to come in and sort of give sessions of an art history course? I'm interested to see how these technologies are playing out in the museum and the public's experience, but how does it affect academia? That's something I'd like to know a little bit more about.
Well, this is obviously a dynamic area of thinking and rethinking. I mean, in my own case, I've been using the indispensable, Art Institute of Chicago-based scholarship on the Grand Jatte for, as long as ever since the things when Rick Bertel was still here in the 80s, up to the Bob Herbert, and that's always part of my account of that picture, and the degree to which I can incorporate that. I do, but anyway, I don't have a very coherent thing to say, except that it obviously, sort of in the spirit of what we were saying when we first began talking up here on the stage, it is obviously urgently incumbent upon, university-based scholars like me to grapple with this and to do right by it, which is to say, to do right by the students by incorporating this into an account, which which must include as many components as possible, and now this has to be one of them. So I'm sure you'll help me figure it out. And Francesca?
And from my perspective, yes, I mean, certainly in Chicago, this Mellon initiative that has been mentioned many times has made it so that both my colleagues, Mark Walton, who's a material scientist, will teach a seminar in the Department of Art History at Northwestern that is focused on materiality or research methods, and also undergraduate seminar focus on materiality and modernity. I think there's certainly in my field of conservation science a lot of discussions of how can we perhaps think of syllabi that are not the other art history, that are not the technical art history, but bring this different lens to students of both art history, but also at the undergraduate level, maybe also the material science and the engineers, because they also have to think of how their inventions are received when they're trying to do technology innovation. So in a sense, there are methodological parallels with the methods of art history. So that to me is a very stimulating, interesting thing. We're doing some experiments. I certainly teach guest lectures, but thinking of a syllabus is much more challenging and interesting in this realm, trying not to have the containers.
Yeah. Mark Walton's course at Northwestern was immediately fully subscribed.
I mean, just one short footnote to that is someone who teaches core classes at the University of Chicago, which bring together undergraduates from all different domains for one introductory course to art history. I'd say this is opening up many different ways of entering into the subject. So I've used the catalog, and chemistry majors have something to say in class. I try to pull them, into the general discussion, but it's very useful and productive, and I think a good development in that way that this is available for us to teach. So I think we're out of time.
Yeah, I'd like to issue a warm thanks to all of our speakers who really went the extra mile to ask hard questions and step a little bit outside of our comfort zones here. So we're going to take a break for lunch and reconvene at 2 p.m. For some case studies this afternoon on Gustave Caillebotte, Edward Manet, Van Gogh, and Paul Gauguin. So please join me in thanking our speakers.